Hello, team players. Are you wanting to be a great team leader? Or maybe you just want to get more out of your charisma in combat? Well, have I got an archetype for you? Time to cover the Marshal. Let's dive in. But first, a huge thank you to my very first channel member, Underhill. Join today for some amazing perks. What I love about the Marshal Archetype is that most of its feats allow you to help your team a lot by using one or even no actions. Some Marshal feats do require 2 actions. However, most of them, one action. Meaning you can take this archetype with any character that has good charisma, assuming they're also trained in martial weapons, because that's one of the prerequisites. To take the dedication, you also need to be trained in intimidation or diplomacy. When you take this archetype, choose intimidation or diplomacy. You become trained in that skill, or expert if you are already trained. You also gain a 10-foot Marshal's aura that affects some of your abilities from this archetype. Just from taking the dedication, your Marshal's aura gives you and your allies within it a +1 status bonus on saves against fear. Not only is fear extremely common, it's also one of the worst conditions you can be under. So anything you can do to keep your party from getting that condition is going to help a lot. For level 4, I'm going to start with 3 stances that essentially work the same but do different things. Like most stances, all of these require 1 action to get into. But for these, you must make a charisma-based check depending on the stance to enter them. The DC is a standard DC for your level. On a critical success, you not only enter the stance, but your Marshal's aura increases to a 20-foot emanation. On a regular success, of course, you do enter the stance. And on a failure, you fail to enter the stance. On a critical failure, you not only fail to enter the stance, but you also can't enter the stance for a full minute. Entering Devrin's Cunning Stance requires a deception check. Entering the stance gives you and your allies in your Marshal's aura a +1 bonus to skill checks. In addition, when you or an ally successfully strike a flat-footed enemy, that enemy can't use reactions until the beginning of its next turn. So this one is mainly going to be used to help your allies with their intimidation and athletics checks. In addition to maybe acrobatics and all of the recall knowledge skills if your party decides to do that. The striking a flat-footed enemy thing is kind of situational because a lot of enemies don't even have reaction. Entering Dread Marshal Stance requires an intimidation check. Entering the stance gives you and your allies a bonus to damage equal to the amount of damage dice of the weapon you're currently wielding that has the most. Also, when you or an ally critically hit a foe within your Marshal's aura, that foe is frightened 1. Inspiring Marshal Stance requires a diplomacy check. While in the stance, you and your allies gain a +1 bonus to attack rolls and saves against mental effects. All these stances are great for teamwork, and which one you pick is ultimately going to depend on what charisma-based skills you're trained in. But remember, you can only be in one stance at a time, so it's probably better to pick one and stick with it. Next for level 4, we've got Push Back the Dead. When you use this action, pick an ally. That ally gains a +2 bonus to saves against effects that originate from undead. They also gain resistance to attacks made from undead equal to half your charisma modifier. This one is pretty situational, as this only works against undead creatures. So I personally wouldn't take this one unless you're planning on facing a whole bunch of undead. Next up is Snap Out of It. Choose one ally within your Marshal's aura who's being affected by a mental effect that allowed a will save and has a duration of no longer than 1 minute. That ally can make an immediate second will save with a +1 bonus to the check. The effect ends on a success, but regardless of the result of the check, the target ally is immune to this feat for 10 minutes. Again, pretty situational, because not many creatures do use mental effects. But this does work on certain fear effects, and fear is pretty common. And finally, for level 4, with Steel Yourself, you can choose one ally within your Marshal's aura. That ally gains temporary hit points equal to your Charisma modifier and a +2 bonus on Fortitude saves. Both these benefits last until the start of your next turn. This is another great one for level 4, as giving your allies a bonus on Fortitude saves is kind of situational, but the temporary hit points will always help. Okay, first up for level 6, we've got Cadence Call. For one action, once per minute, we can give all allies in our Marshal's aura the Quickened condition, but they can only use the extra action to stride. At the end of each ally's turn, if they use the extra action, they become slowed 1 until the end of their following turn. But don't worry, there's a feat later on that will get rid of this downside. But even this feat can be useful, as an extra stride can be pretty useful even if you do get slowed 1 on the next turn. And then we've got Rallying Charge. For 2 actions, you can stride up to your speed and make a melee strike. If your strike hits and damages an enemy, then all allies within 60 feet who saw you hit gain temporary hit points equal to your Charisma modifier until the start of your next turn. This one is pretty good too because it's a stride, a strike, and you give your allies temporary hit points. Pretty nice. At level 8, Marshals do have access to the reactive strike reaction. However, I'm not going to go into that because if you play the fighter, you know what that does. But if you don't, it's on screen as well. With back-to-back, as long as you and an ally are adjacent to each other, neither one of you can be considered flat-footed due to being flanked, as long as you both aren't flanked. If you're adjacent to more than one ally, all eligible allies benefit from this feat. The benefit of this feat is negated if you and an ally are being flanked, but not if multiple allies are being flanked, but you aren't. This makes it pretty difficult to benefit from flanking. So this feat is pretty awesome for teamwork. And finally, for level 8, we have 2 Battle. You can spend 1 or 2 actions on this feat. Choose an ally within your Marshal's aura who has a reaction available. If you spend 1 action on this feat, that ally can use their reaction to immediately stride. If you use 2 actions, they can use their reaction to strike instead. So you're essentially giving an ally a stride or a strike on your turn if they have a reaction available, which honestly I think is pretty nice. Yes, you are essentially giving up your actions so that an ally can hit or move, but hey, it's still pretty good, because you attacking might not always be the best option, but your ally attacking might be different. At level 10, with Topple Foe, if a foe hits with a melee strike against a foe that you are both adjacent to, you can use a reaction to immediately attempt an athletics check to trip that foe. And because you are doing it as a reaction, there is no multiple attack penalty. This can help your ally better hit on their second attack. Plus, tripping makes the foe flat-footed. So, if your ally just so happens to be a rogue, guess what? Sneak attack. This feat is really, really good. At level 12, we have Coordinated Charge. For 2 actions, you can stride up to your speed and make a melee strike. If this strike hits and damages an enemy, all allies within 60 feet can use a reaction to stride if they saw you hit. However, if they use this extra movement, they must end their stride closer to the enemy you hit than when they started. This one is only really good for other melee attackers, as spellcasters more than likely won't want to be closer to the enemy than when they started. It is a real shame that spellcasters can't use this stride to get further away from the enemy, but it's still a fantastic option for other melee attackers. And now we come to the last 2 feats of the Marshal Archetype at level 14. First up is Tactical Cadence. When you use Cadence Call, your allies can use the extra action to stride or strike, and they're no longer slowed if they use the extra action. This is literally a 1-round haste for every single ally in your Marshal's aura for 1 action. This is flat out ridiculous. Unfortunately, they can't use it to step, but at least it's an extra action with no downside. And finally, we have Target of Opportunity. This one's meant for ranged marshals. If an ally succeeds at a ranged strike against a target that is within the first range increment of a ranged or thrown weapon you are wielding, you can use a reaction to immediately make a ranged strike at a -2 penalty. And of course, this is a reaction, so no multiple attack penalty. If this strike hits, combine this damage with your ally's damage for the purposes of weaknesses and resistances. So weaknesses and resistances only apply once on both your attacks. This is especially helpful if the enemy you're facing just so happens to be resistant to piercing damage, or whatever type of damage your attacks do. So the Marshal is one of my favorite archetypes because it showcases another aspect of Pathfinder 2e that I really enjoy. And that is just how powerful teamwork can actually be. Remember, you can use every one of these feats and still get at least 1 attack in on your turn. And believe me, you don't want to use that 3rd action to attack. That multiple attack penalty is pretty bad. This is an awesome archetype for anyone that can use martial weapons and has good charisma. And the critical success effects of those stances I talked about earlier means you're always going to want to be in one of those, as a 20-foot emanation is pretty large. And with Cadence Call, you can quicken allies for a round pretty much every combat. And the temporary hit points that some of these feats give you is nothing to sneeze at either. Overall, the Marshal isn't for every class, but for those that can take it, it's amazing. But if you guys enjoyed the video, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more Pathfinder 2e teamwork content. If you're interested in an animist teamwork build, you can check out this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital.